Good morning. It is Saturday, July 19th, 2025. This is our annual precept retreat at Zazenka. It's just a half day from 9 o'clock to noon. And tomorrow, Sunday the 20th, is the Jukai ceremony. So those members who elect to undergo Jukai Kokudo or initiation into Soto Zen are invited to attend this retreat in which we delve into the precepts. The approach that we take to the precepts in Soto Zen is based on our founder in Japan, Master Dogen, A.A. Dogen. And he said, amongst other things, he said, sitting in Zazen, what precept is not fulfilled? Well, all the precepts, like all of the teachings, come down to a simple fact of direct experience in Zen, primarily Zazen in the Christian, but also in daily life. And so we say in the ceremony, you must not break any of these precepts. Of course, as I make point, we observe them by breaking them. That is, we recognize in our behavior from day to day or from time to time that we just violated a precept or we just maybe did not understand the precept. And so find ourselves retaking the precepts over and over again as we go through daily life. So all of the classes that I give here at the Atlanta Soto Zen Center are somewhat improvisational in that I've done them before, and each time I take a little different, I see a little different opportunity or a different approach to take that may make more sense or try to incrementally improve. So this time we will be doing 6 periods of Zazen with a Teisho. Teisho is a brief, relatively brief, pointed call. Dogen was said to have admired Myojo, a Chinese teacher that he encountered before he came back from China to Japan, and under whom he had a profound experience of insight. And one of the writers said he wanted to be like Myojo, and that Myojo would follow the monks into the assembly hall, which may have been the Zendo, and would give a give a lecture at 3 o'clock in the morning. Everybody would show up to hear what he had to say. So he was very impressed with Myojo, and Myojo would often say something while the monks were sitting in Zazen. In fact, the triggering event for Dogen's profound insight was such an incident where it was said that Myojo was going through the Zendo carrying his slippers, as he usually did, and Dogen, being the lowest rank, he was from China, he was not Japanese, so he was an outlander, had the last seat in the hierarchy down at the one corner of the Zendo, at the end of the Zendo, sitting next to the most junior Chinese monk, storygoer. And this young monk was falling asleep. So Myojo slaps him on the shoulder with his clippers and says something to the effect that in Chinese, Zazen is not sleeping. Zazen is dropping off body mind. And overhearing this, Dogen had profound insight. It's the famous story where he went into the abbot's quarters and um, sort of announced his experience, and Myojo confirmed it right away. Yeah, Shinjin Datsurak. Shinjin is body mind, and Datsurak means dropped off. And the things ended with Datsurak, Datsurak. This dropping off, dropped off. So it's one of those many expressions in Zen that kind of points to the singularity of the experience of the truth that's in, or the reality that's in it pointing at. Dropping off, dropped off. So, long story short, it turns out that Dogen misunderstood the Chinese. So what sort of a profound insight was actually a kind of mistake, misinterpretation of what Myojo actually said. So when we practice Zen, we sit in Zazen, we sit without aiming at it, taking effort without aiming at it, sit without relying on anything. We take this kind of absolutist approach to what this is about. There's no way we can preconceive where this is going. There's no way we can even understand it if and when such an insight or awakening, however you want to think about it, occurs. Turning about in the inmost consciousness is the way Buddha described it. Backward step was one of the expressions that Dogen used, at least in terms of our approach. We let it come to us. We don't try to go to it. So in each of the sessions this morning, 9 to 9:30, I have a little different precept that I will speak about briefly. But I want you to, I suggest that you take that teaching, that precept, or those precepts, first session here, 9 to 9:30, three pure precepts, and see if they are not fulfilled in your Zazen, as Master Dogen said. Second one will be affirm life. The third, be giving. Fourth, honor the body. Manifest truth, proceed clearly. Those are the first five precepts given to lay practitioners. So the three pure precepts and the refuge and repentance and refuge are considered also precepts, and they come before in the ceremony. We're all very familiar with the repentance and refuges. So I want to simply address the first pure precepts. There were three pure precepts. So listen to these, and I'd like you to contemplate what they mean to you. That's an exercise that I would ask you to do toward the end of the retreat, and possibly as part of your going through the ceremony tomorrow, is to paraphrase these precepts in your own words. The writing exercise you can do on your own time. All the teachings are like that. It's helpful if you try to paraphrase them. So the three pure precepts. The first pure precept is not creating evil. Do no harm. The second pure precept is practicing good. Do only good. The third pure precept is purifying intentions. Do good for others. Let that be your focus. And again, as Master Dogen said, in Zazen, what precept is not fulfilled? And you see how those precepts, three pure precepts, Pure meaning non-dual, not pure in the moral sense. All they are fulfilled in your zazen. Do a short walking period. Continue sitting if you like. And just Zendo's a little disruptive, so find a pattern you can do. Oil was settling in. And she too. Applying perspectives on the precepts. Multiple issue talking about again ethic in Kyoto collection. And then we frequently think of the Bodhisattva, speak of one in the Makahanya Shingyo, the chant used in Zen temples every day. In this chant about the highest, most perfect, great wisdom, we review the enlightenment of a Bodhisattva who has discovered emptiness. We think of the compassion and wisdom of the Bodhisattva whose desire is to bring others to enlightenment. We often think of it in a much too abstract sense. It is easy to think of the Bodhisattva as something godlike, who is separate from the rest of us in some way. It's important to remember that the wisdom of the Bodhisattva cannot remain locked in their head, but must be extended to others. And that a Bodhisattva's compassion cannot remain within their heart. It must be made part of their action. You must remember that the Bodhisattva is not a god, but an enlightened human being, becoming enlightened and aware of mu, or emptiness, not a principle of religion, but a potential of each man, woman, and child, here and now. Also, on the precepts, it is important that we realize that in the world of the Buddha, completely good behavior, completely good deeds, and loving kindness to all beings is the way things are. And that a Buddha is not something apart from this world. We must understand each person has the potential to become a Buddha in this life, to live that way day by day. If you recall, after the historical Buddha's enlightenment, he continued to live in this world until he succumbed to old age. His whole life was one of compassion for others. He did not yearn for a life of solitude, but lived among the, quote, common people. In our daily lives, this compassion for others must take the form of the precepts that urge us not to kill, not to steal, to be faithful to our husbands or wives, not to lie, not to indulge excessively in intoxicating liquors or herbs, not to speak of others' shortcomings. These are the latter 5 precepts. Not to refrain from praising yourself and from blaming others. To give willingly to charity, either material or spiritual goods. Not to be angry, and to respect the Buddhist beliefs about the oneness of all things, the refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. If we do these things, our lives will benefit ourselves and others, and will be charitable, tender, loving, kind, and sympathetic. Whoever is compassionate, this is a quote, is everyone beloved, everywhere beloved. By the kind and good, one is cherished as a friend. That one's death, one's heart is full of peace. So the precept for this segment is to affirm life. John Dido Laurie published a book called, I believe it's The Heart of Being, which analyzes the precepts in 3 different levels. The literal, the sort of absolute, and I believe the compassionate was the 3rd category. So in some lineages, the expression is, I take up the way of affirming life. Affirm life was Dido Laurie's positive expression, and we've adopted that. The prohibited part is do not kill. So affirm life, do not kill. So from a absolutist perspective, it's obviously impossible. In order to live, our body has to eat other forms of life. It has to kill the microbes that are invading the body. So this is not to be understood in a literal sense. So one question you might ask yourself is, what are all the different ways I can kill? What are all the different meanings of killing? Well, we all understand that the precepts are not commandments. They're not commandments from God. Some people who first encounter them from a Christian background sound very much like a commandment. But the commandment in Christianity, as we all know, is do not murder, that is, do not kill another human being. Murdering is different from killing. Murdering is killing your own kind. Killing is just part of the food chain. So these are koans, dilemmas, uh, not necessarily to be resolved in any rational, logical sense. But how are the many ways we can affirm life? One definition of killing in Buddhism that I came across is that it is to not deny something its Buddha nature. So if you're truly repulsed by spiders, cockroaches, mosquitoes, so forth, snakes, whatever, um, you're killing them. That is, you're denying that they share your Buddha nature. In most Zen centers and in some people's homes, we find insects and we pick them up with a tissue and carry them out and set them outside. This is a typical tradition, a custom. Charming life has many, many different dimensions. When you experience the death of a loved one, even a pet, um, the grief that you feel is a form of affirming life. Grief is always real, cannot be denied. You might imagine the Buddha never felt grief once he had become enlightened. I think that's a rather shallow interpretation. So again, in this particular period, Chief Zazen is not affirming life. Before we leave from life, do not kill. You read here from Thich Nhat Hanh's Zen precepts. When we deal with translation, translating from language to language, of course, but it's also translating from culture to culture, cultural milieu, if you will. And this is why paraphrasing, trying to express something in your own words, at least to yourself, uh, probably require exercise. But Thich Nhat Hanh was known for writing many, many books that are basically small books, not very long, but I think they had the public function of keeping him sort of before the public, so to speak. And it's a very good strategy for um, promoting and promulgating Zen to the American public. So 21 of these are told. I'm not sure. Some of them refer back to the precepts as we are familiar with them. The first one, for instance, is do not be idolatrous about or bound to any doctrine, theory, or ideology, even Buddhist ones. All systems of thought are guiding means. They are not absolute truth. So that's the point that we make quite often, that these are all models for us to go by. And the model is never complete, of course. So some of you recognize, do not say untruthful things for the sake of personal interest or to impress people. Do not utter words that cause diversion and hatred. Do not spread news that you do not know how, you do not know it can be certain. So, but the ones on do not kill, um, do not live with a vocation that is harmful to humans and nature. Do not invest in companies that deprive others of their chance to life. Select a vocation which helps realize your ideal compassion. Do not kill. Do not let others kill. Find whatever means possible to protect life and to prevent war. So you can see how you're expanding on these basic precepts of Zen, bringing them more into the social context of international politics and so forth. Like citizen of Vietnam and survived the war there. Well, many people in Buddhism or Zen quickly simply avoid bringing politics into the picture at all. But we cannot tolerate injustice as we see it. We could be wrong. Um, without becoming partisan and picking how to make this point. And we can manifest the teachings of Buddhism, act on them without becoming engaged in a partisan kind of argument, which does little to advance the cause of humanity. So the next one is be giving. Be giving. Um, it's kind of an odd construction if you think about it. Be giving. The, the oddness of the construction, I think, comes from the English language. We are what we are. We cannot be anything but what we already are. But it's a be giving kind of strange construction, as if we could be something we're not already. So the prohibitive side of that is do not take what is not freely given. If you think about it, um, what is freely given? In the meal chant, we say we reflect on the efforts that brought us this food. Some versions say the 52 efforts that brought us this food. So you could say all of the farmers, producers, handlers, clippers, food comes from all over the world now rather than from our local community gardens, which is probably part of the issue with health and wellness current today. If we all had our little garden out back, we might be better off. It seems freely given. That is, you just go to the store and you pay for it. Um, but you have to consider the slaughterhouses and the animals that are killed. Um, Part of what we are freely given. Oxygen seems to be freely given. We all breathe enough oxygen in the same room. Of course, we have our sophisticated HVAC systems nowadays. But even in an open air monastery, the oxygen seems to be freely given. Like water. Water is scared, and now we have vast systems of filtering water, refining it, recycling it from sewage back to potable status. It's not exactly freely given. There's a lot of expense and a lot of effort, a lot of infrastructure involved these days. Just in having potable water. You are locked in a truck with 50 other immigrants and can't get out. And the oxygen in that truck, for every breath you take, you're taking oxygen from others in the truck. If you're in the desert and limited amount of water, every drink of water that you take potentially deprives somebody else of that life-giving fluid. So these precepts are not hard, fast, stacked in concrete, simple. They are conditional, not exactly situational ethics, but certainly what is freely given differs by circumstance. So again, contemplate how your zazen is giving and not taking that which is not really given. So we have been given, uh, do not take what is not freely given. And moving on to honor the body. But before we do that, a couple of capping comments on be giving, do not take. Usually translated or read, expressed as do not steal. And we have a series of often contact and precepts as, and they consisted of first the three pure precepts, three refuges, and the three actions, and then actions of body, mouth, and mind, from which come karmic consequences, as we mentioned in the repentance. Then so I approach the paramitas precepts as precepts are part of the paramitas, as we know, as generosity, morality or ethics, precepts, shila, and so forth. And it occurred to me that they could be thought of as a prescription. The precepts, like the Noble Eightfold Path, amount to a prescription for practice, as they are usually interpreted. The second paramita, shila, sometimes translated as morality or ethics, lists the 10 grave precepts of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So you can think of prescription aspect or dimension of precepts as the relative. That is, it would be the way they're interpreted culturally, socially, and so forth. Here it should be said that morality, which is another term often associated with precepts rather than ethics, morality in Buddhism is not the same as it is in other philosophical or religious systems. Leading a moral life is regarded as a natural consequence of insight and meditation. Then I took them up as a description, the absolute, not prescription, but description, like the Four Noble Truths, description of dukkha existence as inherently change, thus inherently suffering, is a description of reality. Take it or leave it. Prescription would be the Four Noble Truths, prescription for practice. So in another sense, the precepts constitute a description of reality, the Dharma as law, the way things work. For example, the fact that we cannot steal in any determinative sense of the word. We cannot own anything, so we cannot steal anything either, in the absolute sense. It is futile to believe in either side this delusion. So we're staying with this do not take what is not freely given for a moment. The famous story of a monk, a monastery in which somebody was stealing. And you may have heard the story, so give the repetition. And they figured out who it had to be, the monks, and they went to the seniors and they reluctantly called him up in front of the assembly, said, monks didn't have much, but it was pretty obvious if something was stolen, something would disappear. And he confessed, this monk confessed that he had been stealing from the others and so forth. And so they all wanted him to be thrown out of the monastery. And the abbot intervened. The abbot said something to the effect that this poor brother doesn't even know that he cannot steal. If I don't teach him that, who will? So the other monks were not satisfied with this, and the story goes they left one by one, left in droves or whatever, deserted the monastery. And over time, they all came back probably because the options weren't that great. In those days, you would become part of the army, or you would be a villager, you'd have to till the soil and so forth. So monastic option was a pretty good deal in those days to live in a monastery where you're at least pretty much assured of having enough food to eat and so forth. And Buddhism endured through tumultuous warring periods all through China and Japan, so it's a very familiar story. So the story goes that this recalcitrant monk who was stealing from the others eventually becomes the successor of the abbot. Now today we would translate that into our culture idiom saying, well, what a wonderful, kind old man the abbot had to be, or, you know, this thief was probably abused as a child and so forth. Sentimental kind of interpretation of what happened there. But I think we want to look at it differently. The abbot just insisted on the truth. He said, it's not possible to steal. You may think somebody stole something from you, and the Marxist, ownership is determined by utility. You're correct. They have the use of it, and you don't. They stole your car, and you can't drive your car, or whatever it happens to be. But in the absolute sense, in the Buddhist perspective, it's not possible. So both the thief who thinks they're stealing something from somebody and the victim who thinks something got stolen from them are in error. So if you look at this from that sort of global perspective, it's not a social justice perspective. It's a sort of a reality-based perspective. It's really liberating. So they're saying, be giving, not to take what is not freely given. As sort of universal connotations. This next one is also universal in a couple of ways that I will discuss. Honor the body. Do not engage in sexual misconduct. So there are no hard and fast rules for this. It's up to you to decide what is sexual conduct, what is sexual misconduct in your life, in your relationships. Most people say objectifying the other person, indulging in, I believe it's prostrating to the attainment of the marrow. Goes into great detail on ridiculing the Japan of his time where they had men-only Zen temples. Women were not allowed to come to that temple. And women were objects of sexual lust and desire. He goes into some really abstract teachings about how even sunlight reflecting off the ocean can be figure of sexual desire. So, based on some stories that were extant in the time of popular literature. So, and if a 7-year-old girl is a Dharma holder, we prostrate to that 7-year-old girl. So this text and others that he published were used much later in World War II, 1945 era, for the nuns to lobby for absolute equal treatment of female priests with male priests, the ability to head a monastery, and all of those kinds of things. And in the midst of the chaos of the atomic bombs and so forth, the Sotos in Parliament passed that measure. And the nun who led the charge is very famous because of it. How well they implemented that, how true it is that equality was actually manifested. It's another question. But to honor the body means also, I think, looking at nature. Do not engage in sexual misconduct. If you look at nature, uh, you cannot comprehend all of the sexual variations there are in nature, the animal kingdom alone. Then you have the vegetable kingdom, of course. Then you have these in between, like the viruses. but not quite living, not quite animal. And yet there's a reproductive cycle. So like many things in science and many things in Zen, extremely complex systems derive from extremely simple systems, simple interacting. There are fish that can change their gender. A male fish changes to a female and takes care of the eggs, things of that nature. Pretty hard for us to grasp. In the human realm, what has been sexual misconduct, what is now social mores and standards and so forth, was not a century ago, 2 centuries ago, uh, during the time of Rousseau, philosopher. They were first beginning to be able to bring like Native American chiefs to London and show them off in their buckskins and feathers and so forth. And reports began coming in all over the world, different manners and customs around the world having to do with what is proper behavior. And Rousseau was one who was discussing the weight of custom, how we're carrying this huge weight of custom that we think is the way reality is. But when you go into other situations, tribal situations, different cultures, different languages around the world, it's not that way at all. There was even an article in the paper here decades ago when Atlanta first started becoming populated with people from other cultures and other countries, including Mexico, of course, but also China, Far East, different languages. When I came to Atlanta in 1970, it was there were very few ethnic neighborhoods. It was very much unlike Chicago, which had all its various ethnic neighborhoods very well established. Here it was just beginning. And they published an article, I believe it was in the Journal Constitution, saying that manners are not morality. People may have different table manners, they have different customs, they have so forth, social mores and so forth. How close they stand to each other, how all these kinds of semi-conscious, unconscious names and standards that we take to be the norm. And making the point that when you see people from other countries and other cultures behaving in ways that you find disturbing, it's not necessarily that they are immoral in some sense or uncaring. It's just the manners and customs from where they come are very different than standards that we have here. So this honor the body is like that. Um, it's also taking care of your health and wellness. Master Lung Yan, quoted in Dogen's vow, says, "In this life, save the body. It is the fruit of many lives. Before Buddhas were enlightened, they were as we. We in the future shall be Buddha's ancestors and so on. In this life, it seems to be taking a divergent point. In this life, save the body. It is the fruit of many lives." But if you think about it, if you're unhealthy, and you can be socially unhealthy, you can be neurotic, you can also be physically unhealthy, mentally, emotionally, chemically, so forth. Um, it affects everything. So if we don't take care of the body, we're not honoring the body. And Zazen is very clear on this. Zazen is the exercise of the body. We begin with the body. So again, examine thoroughly in practice, as Master Dogen would often say, whether or not your Zazen is honoring the body. And from one perspective, your body is thoroughly engaged in sexual conduct. You have X and Y chromosomes acting at all times in your body. We may have been born as a female in past life. We may be born as female in future lives, according to this if you call it conjecture of rebirth. So I think we want to sidestep those kinds of categories that are culturally imposed and learned by which we think we are honoring the body. In fact, put it on a different level, honor the body in a totally different way. In Zazen, Dogen said, what precept is not fulfilled? In Zazen, you could say you're honoring the body to the greatest degree you possibly can. Body and mind cannot separate. So you are revisiting, reinforcing, rediscovering that fundamental non-duality of your own body and mind. before we start getting after residents, do you know can you find a copy of the Shambhala Dictionary of Buddhism in Zen? I was looking, I couldn't find it. So in the 11 o'clock period, we're taking up manifest truth. And you may question the word manifest. There's a reason for it. As said in the ceremony, we say, manifest truth, do not speak falsely. So the manifest, I think, is a recognition that you cannot speak the truth. Word, it is not beyond word, but speaking itself is the Dharma, even though what you're saying is not necessarily. The very sound, the physical reality of speaking, one of the three actions, body, mouth, mind, one of the actions of the mouth is speaking. Manifest truth means that you're manifesting the truth, whether you know it or not. What you have to say about it may be confused, may not be on point. That's why the Chinese liturgy refers to this again and again. Clear and murky phrases are distinguished in the brightness, and finding common words emerged in the darkness, so forth. They're very conscious of the fact that what they're trying to express in language cannot really be captured in language. Although it is not constructed, it is not beyond words. We can point at it. So manifesting the truth, do not speak falsely. In one sense, we can't help but speak falsely. So it's kind of one of those catch-22 clues. I'd like to read a little bit to you from Okamura Roshi's document. It was copied to you, so you may have already read through it. It was put online to be downloaded. On the 16 precepts. Now, it's understood that the 16 precepts that Master Dogen, including repentance refuges, the 3 pure precepts, and the 10 grave precepts, amounts to 16, could not have been given to him in China the same way. They just didn't do it that way. So, again, this was an innovation of Dogen, or it was some sort of paraphrasing, as he paraphrased many of the teachings, including Fukan Zazenki from the Chinese original. Zazenka was a Chinese poem, and he did his variation or his version of that for his Japanese students. And so we understand that the precepts as we receive them in the Soto tradition, Japanese Soto tradition, would not be the same in China. He would not have received these precepts as such. So a little introduction: by receiving the precepts, we become Buddhists. And this was published in the Dharma Eye, which is the Soto Zen journal. This was way back in 2004. It's a long time ago. And I think you can look that up if you're ever interested. It's really worthwhile reading. Soto Zen journal, Dharma Eye. And this was by Shoaku Okumura, director of Soto Zen Buddhism International Center. So he was part of Soto Shu for a long part of his career. Begins with by receiving the precepts, we become Buddhists. Now I want to say a little bit about that. We say spit when you say Buddha. Buddha was not a Buddhist. What Buddha did in deciding to teach became what we call Buddha Dharma, became the Dharma. And those who gathered around him, starting with the 5 ascetic monks he had been traveling with, became the Sangha. So the 3 treasures, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, 3 legs of the Zen stool, or Buddhist stool, so to speak, were initiated by Shakyamuni. But he himself was not a Buddhist. There was no such thing as Buddhism. And so we want to keep that non-duality in mind too. But Buddhism is not an ethnic religion. No one is born a Buddhist. In order to be a Buddhist, we need to make up our minds to take refuge in the 3 treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In this way, we receive the Buddha's precepts as guidelines for our life. Originally, in India, monks received 250 Vinaya precepts, and nuns received 348 precepts. Lay people received 5, 8, or 10 precepts. Mahayana Buddhism in China, monks and nuns received both the Vinaya precepts and the Bodhisattva precepts that were probably created in China. Precepts in the Japanese Tendai school. At the beginning of the 9th century, Saicho, 767 to 822, the founder of the Japanese Tendai school, decided it was necessary to confer only the Mahayana precepts. Saicho's reason for this was that Japan was a Mahayana country, and the Vinaya was not Mahayana. In the Tendai school, the Mahayana precepts were called Endonkai, perfect and immediate precepts, which consisted of the threefold pure precept, the 10 major precepts, and the 48 minor precepts. These originated in a sutra called the Bonmo Kyo, the Brahman Net Sutra. According to modern scholars, this sutra was composed in China in the 5th century CE and not in India. Dogen Zenji received only the Bodhisattva precepts. Dogen Zenji, 1200 to 1253, the founder of Japanese Soto school, originally became a monk in the Japanese Tendai tradition in 1213. He was only 13. Therefore, he received only the Mahayana precepts. According to his biography, Dogen had some difficulty receiving permission to practice in a Chinese monastery. This was because he had not received the Vinaya precepts, which was a requirement to be recognized as a Buddhist monk in China. However, he did not receive the Vinaya precepts. To his disciples and lay students, Dogen Zenji only gave the 16 precepts that were called Buso Shoden Bosatsu Kai, the Bodhisattva precepts that have been correctly transmitted by Buddhas and ancestors. The nature of the Bodhisattva precepts we receive in Soto Zen tradition is quite different from that of the Vinaya precepts. So we won't go much further in here. He makes the point that Buddha would tell his students, his followers, if they make a mistake, and it says, as the Buddhist Sangha was established, Shakyamuni Buddha admonished his disciples when they made mistakes and said, you should not do it again. Such admonitions by the Buddha were memorized by Upali, one of the Buddha's 10 great disciples. So possibly we attribute Ananda with doing the memorization and recitation of all the teaching, but maybe different people elected to memorize different kinds of teachings. And so as a group, they preserved the spoken teachings of Shakyamuni. The Buddha did not establish any precepts or regulations before people made mistakes. In the Vinaya text, the stories explaining why the different precepts were made were recorded. When we read these stories, we can see that the Buddhist Sangha was a gathering of actual human beings. People made all sorts of mistakes, even though they aspired to study and practice the Dharma under the Buddha's guidance. So I think that's a very clear teaching that we want to take to heart. They were and we are, in a sense, making this up as we go along. And again, the conditions and so forth that circumstance that causes conditions, so forth, circumstances we find ourselves in, are very, not altogether different, but they're very much more complex, complicated. So a quick synopsis on the precepts, and I'll let this go, and you can follow up by reading it more thoroughly. So the three refuges. First, he talks about repentance and refuges. We make repentance. And maybe it's worth reading that because it's different from the way we chant it. At a precept ceremony in Sotazen, first we make repentance by reciting the following verse. All the twisted karma ever created by me since of old, through beginning was greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, speech, and thought. I now make complete repentance of it all. There's another repentance verse taken from Samattabhadra Sutra that says, the ocean of all upright posture and be mindful, the ocean of all karmic hindrances arises solely from delusive thoughts. If you wish to make repentance, sit in an upright posture and be mindful of the true nature of reality. All faults and evil deeds are like frost and dew. The sun of wisdom enables them to melt away. This verse clearly shows that our precepts are based on awakening to reality and wisdom of such reality. The three refuges. We then take refuge in the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The Buddha is the one who awakened to reality. The Dharma is reality itself, the way things truly are. The Sangha are the people who aspire to study and living according to the teaching of the reality of all beings. The threefold pure. Next, receive the threefold pure precepts, again, non-dual. The precept of embracing moral codes. The precept of embracing good deeds. The precept of embracing all living beings. These 3 points are the direction we walk on the Bodhisattva path. Now that first one, the precept of embracing moral codes, sounds a little too, perhaps, religious or moralistic for us. But Matsuoka Roshi once said, the Zen practitioner has no trouble following the sidewalks. But that I think he meant that we are complete nonconformists in society. So it doesn't hurt to conform to the standard mores, norms, and so forth of society. It does not get in the way of your path, your practice. The 10 major precepts. The 10 major precepts are: do not kill, do not steal, do not engage in improper sexual conduct, do not lie, do not deal in intoxicants. That's the first 5. So those are more for lay practitioners. 6, and this is for disciples as well as lay practitioners, do not criticize others. Do not praise self and slander others. Do not be stingy with the Dharma or property. Do not give way to anger. Do not disparage the 3 treasures. On the first precept, Dogen Zenji comments in Kyoju Kaimon, quote, by not killing life, the seeds of the Buddha are nurtured, and one is enabled to succeed the Buddha's life of wisdom. Do not kill life. In order to nurture the seeds to actualize Buddha, we should strive not to kill. In the same way, the other 9 major precepts all show the virtue of the true reality of all beings. Finally, Zen and the precepts are one. The Bodhisattva precepts we receive in the Soto Zen tradition are also called Zenkai, or Zen precepts. This means that our Zazen and the precepts are one. In our Zazen practice, we put our entire being on the ground of true reality of all beings, instead of the picture of the world that is a creation of our minds. By striving to keep the precepts in our daily lives, we strive to live being guided by our Zazen. Day would be on the 5th. Let's be clear. In the ceremony, we say, proceed clearly, do not cloud the mind with intoxicant. So you may notice the verbs are engage, sometimes indulge, not cloud the mind with intoxicant. Let me read again from my Philippians. In one of his talks, he says, not to indulge excessively in intoxicating liquors or herbs. So that sounds like a little lethal, maybe dodging around the issue. Kente was known for sake and beer. Many Zen teachers from Japan are known to indulge, to imbibe, another verb to use, alcohol. And when you look at the term intoxicant, we've had people who are recovering alcoholics come to retreats, and at one point in the retreat, we break out this sake and beer and guitars and have a little song fest around the fire. And they were very upset and put off by this. But we're not here to protect people from their weaknesses. We're here to provide the environment in which we can confront our weaknesses. So, however dodgy or weasel words like indulge, overindulge, excessively overindulge, or excessively indulge, and so forth, those are, it only points to one thing, that you are the arbiter. You are the arbiter of this. If we were engaged in protecting people from their weaknesses or from their neuroses, we could never have children around. There may be a pedophile in the crowd, a recovering pedophile, we would say. So Zen takes a pretty, in my perspective at least, my understanding is confession and repentance at one time was literal. They would literally confess various deeds they had committed um, in the monastic setting, everybody living together, and understand how that would work. It's now condensed down into this relatively concise catch-all phrasing that we use today. But the intent is still the same. So again, back to the nature and history of the precepts, and if you downloaded one of the documents, it was a wonderful, thoroughgoing sort of study of the history of the precepts put together by Charlie Picorni, who was president of the Zen Buddhist Association at the time, one of the conferences that I attended. And amongst other things, they pointed out that the precepts over time have been around a long time, 2,500 years. They were different, and they were also used differently. For instance, you would there were cases where somebody would offer the precept to the whole village, and everybody would come out and take the precepts, even though they might have taken them before. And that would switch the loyalty of those villagers over to this other temple. It's like everything else in life. They could be used politically and so forth back in the day when they meant something to a lot of people. So fortunately, Harrison was able to find a Shambhala Dictionary of Buddhism and Zen that I recommend highly as being one of the basic books in your collection, Shambhala, Dictionary of Buddhism, is published by Shambhala, obviously. It's a wonderful dictionary which three different experts put together, one of whom was expert in Zen. So they know where they speak. And they do certain things, like in parentheses, they'll put a new term and direct you to also look up that term in this same dictionary. So in each case, they give you kind of a linkage to go through, a kind of a networking, branching thing that nowadays online we do pretty much automatically just by scrolling through links. But they built it into this book. So in here, Jukai is preceded by Jujukai, alphabetically. Jujukai, and it's a Z, so it's a Zen term. Some are B and Z's, both Buddhist and this one is Jujukai, also Jujukinkai. Japanese literally, quote, the 10 main precepts. 10 main precepts of arrow Mahayana Buddhism. So you would also look up Mahayana Buddhism to follow, of which there is an exoteric and an esoteric form. In their exoteric form, the Jujukai forbid A, taking life, B, stealing, C, being unchaste, D, lying, C, selling or buying alcohol, that is, causing others to drink or drinking oneself, F, talking about others' bad deeds, G, praising oneself and deprecating others, H, giving spiritual or material help reluctantly, I, aggression, J, slandering the three precious ones, Sanskrit, Triratna, Sambo in Japanese. That's the three precious ones, the three jewels. These precepts are, with the exception of the chastity precept, the same for monks and laymen. So obviously laymen are householders going to be having children, married, and so forth. And of course, that was not always the case for monastics either. They were, Okumura Roshi was married, and when Korea conquered Japan at one point, I can't remember the dates, they required that the Zen monks in Japan, the Japanese monks, become uncelibate, not be celibate for whatever political reasons they have. So observance of the precepts is not only important for ethical reasons, the precepts are the basis of spiritual practice. One cannot progress on the path of spiritual training if heart and mind are not free from the inner malaise brought about by a careless lifestyle that is in violation of these precepts. So that goes to alcohol and intoxicants in general. They're not so much in themselves considered bad, it's just they lead to violation of other precepts, typically. Regardless of their level of commitment, few novices are able to maintain every precept. Thus, infringements in various degrees are inevitable. Such infringements, however, do not impede progress on the way of enlightenment, provided that one confesses them, genuinely regrets them, and endeavors thereafter to live in accordance with the precepts. So that's why I say we observe them by breaking them. As progress on the path is made and increasing power, purity, and insight come about through meditative practice, Zazen, infringements become less. However, according to the Buddhist understanding, what does bring about lasting impairment and has a disastrous effect on the possibility of spiritual progress is loss of faith in the Buddha, in the truth that he revealed through his complete enlightenment, the Dharma, and in the corroborative teachings of the patriarchs, the Sangha. In this case, it is said complete enlightenment, and therewith the dissolution of the fundamental root of unwholesomeness, ignorance, avidya, and delusion, is impossible. So this is the famous story of the monk in the fourth state of jhana, a monk who imagined himself to be fully enlightened until and Dogen tells this story in one of his fascicles, until he is dying, and on his deathbed a vista opens up in front of him that he did not expect. He expected to enter into two-seated heaven, something else. So he became angry, lost fearful, lost faith and confidence in the teachings of Buddha, cursed the Buddha, and fell into hell. So there is implied here a point of no return, but of course in Buddhism, everything, everybody is redeemable. There's nothing that is not redeemable. Present company, instead in the political realm, possibly. Let's not go there. Through the principle of rebirth, everything is redeemable in others. So number 2, in the Jukai, in their esoteric form, one vows A, not to desist from the true Dharma, B, not to give up seeking enlightenment, C, to covet nothing and be niggardly with nothing, D, not to be lacking in compassion toward all beings, E, not to speak ill of any of the Buddhist teachings, F, not to be attached to anything, G, not to harbor false views, H, to encourage people to seek enlightenment, I, to present the teachings of Mahayana also to adherents of the Hinayana, and J, always to practice charity toward bodhisattvas. So you can see esoteric and exoteric versions here would be akin to inner circle, outer circle, within the monastic environment, out in public, would bring about a slight shift in emphasis. And then the definition of Jukai, literally receiving Ju, the precepts, Kai, the reception and acknowledgement of the Buddhist precepts through which one officially becomes a Buddhist. The word officially is kind of funny. And 2, literally, quote, granting Ju, the precepts, Kai. So this is from the celebrant side. The ceremony of initiation into Buddhism. In this ceremony, one commits oneself to be completely devoted to the 3 precious ones. That is the Triratna rather, and Sambho, and the 10 main precepts to cleave to Buddhism. Cleave to Buddhism. I take up the way of. I embrace Buddhism. To avoid all evil, to do good, and to work for the salvation of all beings, the Bodhisattva vow. Jukai is regarded as a major step on the path to Buddhahood. So you can see that the precepts are a living thing. They're not cast in concrete once and for all, forever. So back to my creed on this series of talks I gave. I'll go through this briefly again. Prescription, the relative, amount to prescription for practice as they're usually interpreted. Description, the absolute. In another sense, the precepts constitute a description of reality, the Dhamma as law. And reality, the next one, precepts as reality, the concrete. On the other hand, there are real and karmic consequences of our actions, as well as our inactions. It is futile to try to avoid these consequences, so the only thing is to correct as we become aware of them. In precepts as action, the communal, the most we can do for others in our community is to share this teaching, but only if asked. Unlike other systems of religion, even ideology, we do not proselytize and have no mission to convert others to our way of practice. By our example, we may exert a salutary effect on others. Precepts as freedom, taken on the spiritual, taken on the personal level, the precepts are guidelines to the realization of true freedom or liberation. They relieve us of the burden of serving the self at the expense of others, or allowing others to dominate our spiritual lives. The precepts as process, the practical. We all innately harbor personal precepts regarding killing, stealing, lying, etc., that may not rise to the level of conscious awareness. When we receive the Zen Buddhist precepts, we are induced to call them to consciousness by comparison. Further, our daily activities, as outlined by the Eightfold Path, such as right livelihood, have underlying precepts, sometimes expressed as ethical guidelines, such as the AMA for do no harm, which is the first of the 3 pure precepts of Zen as well. It may be regarded be regarded as the mother of all precepts. But it is often difficult to know when we are doing harm and how to avoid it. Again, we face the consequences and try again. So there's more copy here, and anybody's interested in the email and send it to you. But just going through the chapters again quickly. The precepts as prescriptum, the relative. The precepts as description, the absolute. The prescript as reality, the concrete. The precepts as action, the communal. And finally, the precepts as freedom, the spiritual. Precepts as process. Different takes on the precepts. But you will discover and develop your own. And again, I encourage you at some point to do an exercise paraphrasing the precepts in your own words.